Chapter 12:21 Situation in the Estate. Michael and the Dragonborns teleported just a few kilometers away from the mining shaft. Behind him were the Shadow Orcs, who were just here as a guard to make sure nothing wrong happened. Of course, Zion wasn't allowed to go anywhere near this mission. He felt sorry for the youngest Dragonborn, but having a full dragon emerge out of nowhere would definitely send the wrong message amongst the inhabitants of the mining estate. They'd think they were invading or something. Now, the reason why they didn't teleport directly inside was because he wanted to see the situation in the estate with his own two eyes. He wanted to experience what they were feeling, fear what they were fearing. He wanted to live as they did, at least for a little bit. Only by knowing them intimately could he convincingly try and empathize with their worries. So, using his magic, he was able to wrap everyone's faces with a disguise that made them look a lot less impressive. Even though no one had yet seen the Dragonborns in their new human form, Michael still made sure to add some freckles, imperfections, and pimples in their faces. Since no one could use magic anymore, his command over the mana in the air was simply unbeatable. Nobody would be able to see through them. Then, they strolled through the mining estate through a carriage pulled by normal horses. These people were too mired by poverty to afford automobiles. They probably haven't even seen them. The estate was small. Buildings made of huge slabs of rock were erected alongside the hills and wall faces of the mountainside that they were in. No one greeted them as they entered. This place looked completely barren except for a few men and women looking quite battered and dirtied, no doubt from spending their entire day in the mines. Michael greeted one of them and presented himself as a merchant. "Merchant, we don't have money," the miner replied. "Our supplies are the lowest price you'll find," Michael promised. But instead of being grateful, the man just looked at him with suspicion. There was no way a merchant would lower their prices in such hard times, and even if he was, this meant that his goods were probably already soiled and rotted. "We don't need your help," the man said, "and just a piece of advice: you better scurry off and find another place, somewhere that isn't cursed." The man gave Michael an eye full of warning. No threat in that gaze, just pure warning. "Lord Michael," whispered Shayna from his side. He looked over and saw a family made up of parents and 5 children. They were gaunt, barely skin and bones. One of the children coughed blood, the other vomited. This made Michael grimace. Radiation sickness. He had already spread his presence all over the estate, and he noticed that about 70% of the inhabitants inside were showing signs of radiation sickness. What worried him was that most of their sickness had advanced way past the early stages. If this was Earth, there wouldn't be anything left to do to help them. It was at this point that Jaku unsheathed the katana in his waist and swung it behind him. Apples cascaded from the bag on their carriage. Fruits, cabbages, vegetables, rice grains, all sorts of sustenance flowed out of the sack and were laid out in front of all the sickly people of the mining estate. Everyone stared at the food on the floor. An apple rolled towards one of the children coughing blood. He reached for it and took a bite. Jaku didn't stop him. "What are you all waiting for? I'm not gonna hand them over to you personally," said Jaku as he quickly returned to the carriage to sleep. Seeing the child munching on the juicy apple, the inhabitants of this place began to swarm their carriage. They took what they could, embracing everything in their chests tightly as if they were going to be stolen away. But Michael nor the Dragonborns nor the Shadow Orcs stopped any of them. In fact, Shayna and Yumisu began personally handing bread to the people of the estate with warm smiles on their faces. Even the pimples and imperfections Michael put on them couldn't drown the innate beauty and elegance in their actions. They were angels touched down from heaven. "What are you doing?" The man stepped in front of Michael, anxiety and worry on his face. Even though Michael was barely 15 years old, he was already 6 feet tall. The man was 30 years his senior, but the lack of sustenance stifled his growth, making him a feet shorter. The man wanted to say more, but his eyes glanced at the hungry people of the estate. He saw the brief joy they had while eating something, not for sustenance but for enjoyment. These strange merchants gave them far too much food, far too much that could have actually fit in their carriage. They gave it away at no price, and that's exactly what made the man so worried. "Come with me," he said to Michael. "You may have fed us today, but you will kill us tomorrow."
They, they, they.
The man was named Hopper. He was the president of the mining estate, though based on the dilapidated house he invited Michael on, that title wasn't worth much at all. "Who are you?" Hopper asked. "A friendly merchant," Michael replied, "someone who wants to help you." "We need no help." This struck a chord in Michael. His fellow people were mere hours from dying, and they didn't need help. But he didn't voice it out. He had no right to judge them when he hadn't experienced a lick of their hardship. "If we had just waited for a few more days, everything would have been solved," Hopper said, nervously fiddling his gaunt fingers. "They would have come, they would have fed us, they would have healed us from this eternal curse." Chapter 12:22, Unwilling to Chain. Michael began to learn more about the mining estate's situation. It was more or less the same as with what the shadow orcs reported to him. But what he didn't know was that the inhabitants of this mining estate knew exactly why they were riddled with disease. They knew exactly what caused the curse. "Those rocks, they are a dangerous thing," Hopper said. Michael frowned. "If you know, then why do you stay? If you know that the uranium ore is killing you, why inhabit a place that has tons of them?" Hopper laughed. "It's not so easy, young man." "Is it a matter of where?" Michael asked, lightly hinting about the nation of Reborn. "There are better places, places where you don't have to offer up most of your mining ores to another company, places where you don't have to live in a place that is actively killing you." And for a moment, the old man's eyes glazed with hope. It's as if he had those thoughts long ago when he was but a child. But soon the creases on his face showed. His old age was in full show. "We can't," Hopper said. "Even if we move far away, the curse will still follow us." Michael could see how that could happen. After all, radiation sickness was a hard disease to fight. It could persist for a long time even without contact with uranium itself. "We have been settling here for a long time," Hopper said. "Generations have passed. My grandfather, his grandfather, and his grandfather before him, they all stayed here at this place despite being afflicted with the curse with every generation." This was quite different from what Michael expected. At first he thought they were just staying out of pure ignorance. But it looked like these people were staying simply because of culture, because of convention. It's what's familiar. This curse is a reminder," my father told me. "This curse is something that will tie us back to our forefathers, back when the world wasn't what it was now." Hopper looked at Michael. "So, we will not leave that rock may kill us, but it is our life, it is our livelihood, it is who we are, it is our burden to bear." It was at this point that Hopper raised from his seat and walked away. He only turned when he was about to leave through the door. "I am very grateful that you fed us today, merchant, but I hope you don't visit us again." Then the door closed. Michael just sat on that chair, stewing on the words he just heard. Was there really nothing he could do? Were these people so stubborn in their ways that there was no way that he could change who they were? Then it was at that point that he caught his own words. He'd been so focused, he'd been so adamant in trying to get these people to join the nation of Reborn. He thought that if he offered them food, land, and joy, they would leave this place and become Rebornians. But not everyone wanted to leave their place to go somewhere better. They just wanted to stay where they were. They didn't want to change. In his quest to unite the entire world under his ideals, he was bound to encounter people like them more and more. They'd be even more stubborn, more unwilling to change for the better. They were just like the ersatz. Just he instructed, he had been immersing the ersatz warriors in the lifestyle of Reborn. However, they weren't getting caught into the lifestyle as he wanted. They were adamant in rejecting anything that wasn't related to ersatz, even if they knew that the life in Reborn was better. So what was he to do? Should he just ignore them and let them lead their own lives, even if it was to the point where they ruined themselves? Was that the future he was going to usher forwards? No, he found himself answering. That was not the future he wanted. He wanted the whole world to be comfortable and live happy lives, even if they weren't a part of the Rebornian banner. He wanted their friends and allies and enemies alike to be comfortable. This includes the inhabitants of this mining estate. So the only thing he could do was help them, aid them, make their lives better without changing their lives. It was at that point that he felt his own core thumping at him, whispering to him, telling him what to do. It was for this exact reason that he had this power, why he had the ability to change reality itself. Michael walked out Hopper's dilapidated house, finding himself in the middle of their estate. People still crowded their carriage, Shayna and Yumisu still gave out water and food to anyone who wanted it. Jaku threw apples to bedridden citizens from the carriage. People of the mining estate, heed my words. Michael started to emit power that captured the attention of every single person in this estate. They felt this power before, and they knew what this meant. Nascent spirit. Their eyes widened, seeing such a godlike power being wielded by someone so young. Hopper was shocked, but not like the others. His was confusion more than anything. I cannot change what you all want to do, I cannot make you all move away from this place for safety, but I can make it so that you wouldn't have to suffer this sickness anymore. Forever. No more deaths, no more suffering. Nascent influence started to surge from Michael's core, bubbling, building to a crescendo. If you do not want my help, turn away now. But Michael could see the hope in their eyes, the tiredness they felt suffering in sickness every single month. None of them turned away. Hopper held his heart as if bracing himself. It was at this point that Michael released his nascent influence. A blanket of power emerged out of him, encompassing the entire mining estate and its inhabitants. Home. Info. Saved. Library. Chapter 12:23, Radiation Heal. Everyone felt a warm sensation cloud over their entire bodies. Somehow, this warmth was easing the pain of the burns that the radiation had been inflicted within them. Somehow, Michael was making it as if the radiation wasn't dangerous, wasn't fatal. The effects were immediate. The vomiting, the intense blood-riddled coughing, and the burn-like scars on their bodies had stopped worsening, as if a switch had turned them off just like that. Hopper knew something had changed. He looked at his own body, no longer feeling that weight that dragged down his heart to the deepest depths. He was no longer being pricked by that feeling of the curse slowly growing, festering inside his body until it inevitably took his life. Intuitively he knew he had been saved. And it wasn't like the other cure that the other people had given them. The upper echelon company that had been promising them salvation couldn't replicate the relief that Michael's power now gave them. This wasn't just a shallow feeling, it wasn't just cutting off the leaves of weeds. It was like Michael had completely uprooted the weeds and prevented them from regrowing again. And Michael didn't just end it there. With the power of magic, he instructed ChatJK6 to start a massive healing power all over the mining estate. And soon, open injuries began to close. Skin started to regrow, organs began to move with renewed activity. And best of all, the smile on the inhabitants' faces had finally returned as they realized what was happening in their bodies. Their hair began to grow at an accelerated rate. The blisters formed around their bodies started to disappear. The weakness and fatigue that plagued their bodies for months on end was suddenly cleared like it was the open skies. My eyes I could see again. Is that my heartbeat? You can walk. Those bedridden had finally found themselves able to push themselves off using their own strength. All over, the inhabitants of the mining estate celebrated this sudden change, cries of happiness, hugs, screams of excitement. Hopper was solemn as he looked at the young man in front of him, this stranger. Michael told him he was a merchant, but now he could tell that this youngster was more than what meets the eyes. What did you do? Michael smiled. I made it so that uranium isn't harmful. Even if it spews radiation, it would no longer affect your bodies. This was the power of a nascent influence. He could change the very nature of the world into whatever he wanted. Now, it would seem as if uranium was never actually harmful to these people. That's why the injuries they sustained beforehand were slowly starting to disappear. All the irreversible damage that radiation sickness had done to their organs were reversed. Now, these people would still live in the mining estate without getting killed by it. Even if they wouldn't be a part of the Rebornian territory, they would still be living in comfort and happiness from here onwards. This was the future Michael had for the world. Thank you. Hopper fell to his knees, the weight of everything finally bearing down on him. He was so overwhelmed with emotions, from thinking they'd have no future to now realizing that they could live out the rest of his life with relative peace. Soon the inhabitants of the mining estate began pouring their heartfelt thanks and fealty to Michael. Even the Dragonborns were surrounded on all sides. Michael smiled, watching everything unfold. Now, you don't have to become a slave to those upper echelon companies, you don't have to comply with anyone's orders. After hearing this, Hopper stood up and looked at Michael. You're from the Reborn Company, am I correct? Hopper had seen the emblem on their carriage and correctly guessed their true identities. As it turned out, Hopper had heard the rumors from wandering merchants who had found their way here one way or another. I've heard about what you do for others, about how you keep your prices of food low to all your allies. We want to become a part of your alliance, but unfortunately, we can't. Even if they didn't want to, the mining estate was still locked into a contract. And breaking a contract with an upper echelon company was as hard as trying to chip a diamond, and it was costly too. If they wanted to separate from the upper echelon company, they had to give them a set amount of money for their troubles. Michael smiled. Don't worry about that. If you want to cut off your contract with the upper echelons, I have a friend who will be able to help you. Yuna was already drafting the contract back in the nation of Reborn. She had found a loophole in their contract. The orcs had already found a copy of the contract long before they entered this place. Thank you, thank you. Michael was glad that the mining estate was finally free from the predatory clutches of the upper echelon companies. He was glad that now they had free rein to trade anything they wanted to other people, meaning Reborn could finally obtain the uranium they needed for the nuclear power plant. But even if that didn't happen, he'd have still done the same to see the look on everyone's faces. Seeing their look of relief and joy, knowing that no one would have to die again, made all of this worth it. It emboldened his resolve to keep going, to try and change the world. Lord Michael shall ask our engineers to start construction to anticipate the uranium, Shayna asked him. And just as he was about to answer, Michael felt something within him suddenly click. You have gained +1 spirit. You have gained +1 spirit.
They,
In total, he gained 65 spirit in one go, making his total 461/1000 spirits. This was an unexpected but a welcome surprise. As it turned out, earning spirit wasn't just limited to changing the lives of ersatz. Golden Nose has detected powerful talents in your vicinity.
home, info, saved,
Library. Chapter 12:24 Explosive Talents. Michael's eyes widened. This was so sudden that he immediately had his mini drones released and surveyed the entire area around the mining estate. Did a powerful talent just happen to pass by? However, that was quickly disproved by the fact that the Golden Nose triggered not just once, not twice, not thrice, but a total of 10 times. This wasn't just a coincidence, this was a pattern. Michael immediately asked ChatJK6 to start cataloging the talent that she assessed around him. Most of them were in the A class, a few were in the S class, and there was a single standout who was in the SSS class. This was a huge find. Amongst the hundred of thousands of people that he encountered and searched, there had only been 2 other people who had SSS class talent aside from his own. One was his first ally, Fudge. The mischievous ninja slime was a SSS class talent that became the foundation of the Shadows of Reborn. It was through Fudge's hard work, his antics, and his propensity to never be found out that allowed Reborn to be so well versed in espionage. Fudge could spy against a nascent spirit cultivator, and Michael was sure that he wouldn't be found out. That's how talented the slime was. The next SSS class talent was the youngest Dragonborn, Zion. The red-scaled youngster manifested his immense talent with the fact that before his siblings became magnetics, he was probably the strongest fighter amongst all of them. Michael was pretty sure that if Zion had become a magnetic like the others, he would have been able to beat Shayna, Jakku, and Yumisu altogether. Even he himself wouldn't be sure if he could beat Zion in a one-on-one fight. And even if Zion didn't look impressive now, he was sure that the young Dragonborn was just a late bloomer. Once Zion was able to master his new dragon form, Michael had no doubt that he'd be able to dominate the skis, even more than the draconian youngsters who were considered to be the strongest race in the entire world. And now the next SSS-class talent has appeared, out of nowhere too. Michael closed his eyes, letting Chat JK6 change his perception of reality. Once he opened his eyes, everything looked pale, black and white. The only thing that had any hint of color was the golden threads that led out and into the talents that Chat JK6 inspected. Ignoring Shayna's questions, he walked forward and began to follow the golden threads. It wasn't that long until he found the first prospect, an S-class talent. He was a young man just a few years older than Michael. He seemed to be one of the miners of the estate in charge of gathering the crude minerals from the mineshaft. Michael couldn't believe it, not at the talents nor the surprising quantity of them, but their location. They were all from the mining estate. He didn't discriminate against them. However, if they were talented, then he should have been able to sense them the moment he arrived at this place. His golden nose would have activated immediately as soon as he stepped foot in this place. Except it didn't, it was somehow delayed. Of course, he didn't attribute this to Chat JK6. She was a machine in all senses of the term. She didn't make mistakes. She didn't get lazy. Something happened that allowed her to sense these talented individuals where previously she couldn't. And as if to defend herself, Chat JK6 immediately analyzed the young man in front of him and gave him the details. Talent S-class. Radiative excavator. Michael's eyes widened at the description. It was then that he realized he was what happened, he was what triggered this sudden change. He spread his nascent influence, changing the very nature of radiation itself. He had made it safe. The people of the mining estate were no longer in danger of being near them. And it was then, when their lives were no longer cut short, did their talents fully manifest. These people, due to having experienced radiation throughout their entire lives, had now somehow evolved to let it become their source of power. The man in front of him, the radiative excavator, became more powerful if he was nearer a radioactive material. Michael then rounded up the rest of the talented individuals in the mining estate, and all of them were basically the same. Radiation became their power, they had evolved. This was amazing. Usually, these people didn't live long enough to manifest their true talent. They were deprived of the sustenance they needed to truly fill out their bodies, and therefore they remained weak and gaunt and sickly. So they were dead before they could realize their true potential. They were gone before they could truly evolve. But Michael changed that. He gave them a new lease in life, and because of that they were able to truly evolve. Michael looked around the mining estate, and he realized everyone had evolved. Everyone had, one way or another, become stronger because of the radiation they experienced their whole lives. Most of them didn't have that good of a talent, ranging from the D-class to the C-class, but they had evolved. They had now gained the ability to use radioactive materials as an added firepower. This was a revelation. Michael couldn't have expected that this would happen when he first helped these people. But as it turned out, it was one of the greatest decisions he ever made. Not only did he learn the true power of his nascent influence, evolution, but he also gained more powerful allies and friends because of it. The SSS-class talent was a young woman with short hair. She was sickly, just bones and skin, but Michael could already see the hint of power in her eyes. SSS-class talent, radiation bomb. Do you want to become stronger? He asked the girl. She looked up at him. There was fire in those eyes, and he didn't have to hear what she said to know her answer. Chapter 12:25, Protected by Reborn. Shayna quickly took to introducing their new recruits to the Rebornian system. She'd be the one in charge of training them, accommodating their needs, and everything else. Most of them were clueless. Even as Shayna talked to them about them owning their own automobiles, getting free electricity, all the benefits of becoming a Rebornian citizen, they just nodded. The only thing that was important to them was if they could get food every day. And once Shayna promised them all the sustenance they would ever need to survive for 10 years, they were already on board with anything she said. Hopper was quick to adapt, too. Once he'd realized that the situation in Reborn was a lot better than even the rumors he'd heard, he was quick to convene with the rest of the mining inhabitants about becoming Rebornians. And once they'd learned that Michael wanted uranium from the mining, they immediately led him towards an underground basement near their mineshaft that had an entire room full of uranium. This place would have been more radioactive than any of the nuclear bombs he saw in his previous life combined. But thanks to his nascent influence, these rocks turned meek and without bite. He arranged to buy the uranium they needed for their nuclear power plant. They wanted to give it to him for free, but he refused and gave them even better prices, enough for everyone here to live in luxury. "You can have everything here," Hopper said, offering the entirety of their uranium stores to Michael. He rejected it. He didn't need much as of now. Maybe he'd increase their intake if they built more nuclear power plants in the future, but for now, it would be better if the uranium were stored here in the mining estate. After all, these people had evolved to become stronger with radiation. They were literally 20% more productive, 20% stronger, and 20% happier if they had a uranium rock in their hands. "Tell the engineers to start the nuclear power plant. Oh, and can we please add a concrete road here leading to our highway?"
They, they.
For the next few days, Michael remained in the mining estate along with the Dragonborns. Shayna and her siblings took charge with the 10 talented individuals they found here and started training them. They were quite powerful natural warriors, all of them, but they simply just hadn't held a weapon until Shayna gave it to them. Meanwhile, the Shadow Orcs began to consolidate their tendrils here in the mining shaft, increasing their surveillance over the territories here. And on the eve of the 7th day after the mining estate's liberation, Naruto and Sasuke came to him to give him some reports. "BU-22, boss, we have detected individuals coming to the mining estate. They'll be arriving here in a few hours." Michael had a feeling about who they were. "Ra-ta-ta, they're representatives of an upper echelon company," verified Sasuke. "The Carifula Limited Company, one of the few organizations who were in the anti-reborn faction." He waited for them to come. And for all their hate towards the Reborn Company, their representatives came in with a slew of automobiles. Soon, high-browed people came out of the cars with looks of confusion and a bit of anger on their faces. The mining estate was a lot different than when they left it before. There was more activity, people were talking, discussing, gossiping. This didn't look like anything they saw before. Where was the suffering? Where was the coughing blood? Where was the overwhelming sense of death amongst the people? It's as if these people were cured. As soon as they saw the change in the mining estate, they immediately stomped towards the houses, demanding some answers. Hopper, what's the meaning of this?" A middle-aged fat man, cultivation at the 9th stage of body formation realm, stormed into Hopper's house and found the president of the mining estate casually having dinner with a couple of unfamiliar people inside. "Chicken, vegetables, rice, where did you get that? Did you make trade with other merchants?" The pudgy man couldn't believe it. Hopper was eating better than even them. This was luxurious fine dining. The people of this estate shouldn't be able to afford sniffing this kind of food, much less eating it. "You know that this is not allowed in our contract, right?" Hopper rose up from his seat and walked towards the pudgy elite. The man from the upper echelon couldn't help but swallow his spit. Somehow Hopper had become taller than him, more fit, no longer that gaunt, sickly man he'd seen a month ago. It was at this point that the cultivators behind the pudgy man stepped forward, intending to teach Hopper a lesson on respecting his betters. However, someone spoke up. "Take another step and you'd lose your hands," warned Jocko, still eating his food. The Carifula representatives all looked at the young man with dark hair at the table, and couldn't help but feel a hidden strength emanating from him. It was enough for the guards to actually stop in their tracks. The pudgy man's confusion quickly turned into anger as he realized what was happening. I see, you found yourselves another merchant group to hide yourselves in. This is a breach of contract, you know that, right? We'll sue you to the ends of the world." Yuna walked towards the pudgy man and gave him a piece of paper. Nope, you're not going to do that, or else would you like the Montgomery family to know that you've been taking advantage of a small territory? The man's eyes widened, surprise flashing in his eyes. How did they know about that? The pudgy man lunged for Hopper, intending to capture him. But in that instant, chairs exploded as the Dragonborns immediately acted. The pudgy man found himself flying across the room, crashing on the wall and vomiting blood. The other cultivators didn't fare better. They were beaten the moment they tried to take revenge. Michael walked towards the pudgy man, looking down at him. From now on, the mining estate is protected by the Reborn Company. Chapter 12:26, Fearsome Reputation. As soon as Michael said those words, the pudgy man's face paled as if he'd seen a ghost. Ray's reborn. Now, even with his body lying battered and bloodied, the pudgy man immediately went on his knees and pleaded for an apology from Michael. My apologies, we did not know that you were the Reborn Company. His entire body was shaking, shivering as if he was just mere moments away from his death. It was as if he was afraid that saying the wrong thing here could spell his own doom. Michael definitely didn't expect this kind of reaction from the pudgy man or the rest of the cultivators with him. Once they found out who they were, they quickly changed their tune from angry to repentful. This was weird because technically they were in the right. The Reborn Company was poaching another territory without even talking with another company who had a previous arrangement with the territory. Michael was prepared to fight in court for the release of the mining estate from their contract with the Carifula Company. He would even pay them the money they needed if it meant that there would be no more trouble in the future. But instead, the pudgy man begged on his knees. I will tell my superiors that the mining estate is the Reborn Company's territory. Just like that, an upper echelon company was surrendering one of their territories to the Reborn Company. This was unprecedented. With the kind of greed that those elites had, they wouldn't even surrender a single inch of land to another company, especially that whom they considered their enemy. I hope that this doesn't strain our relationship any further, the pudgy man said. And then, Michael understood. It seemed that the upper echelon companies were finally realizing the importance of the Reborn Company in today's era. They knew that automobiles and fuel were the key to staying afloat in this kind of economy, and if they further angered the Reborn Company, then they would essentially be shooting themselves in the foot. And then there was also the thing about the Dragonborns. He could see the cultivators around the pudgy man look around the room, searching for the Dragonborns, the ones said to have awakened the ancient roar. Meanwhile, the pudgy man himself was prostrating himself to Michael, knowing full well that he was in the presence of the youngest nascent spirit cultivator in existence. He knew that Michael could easily kill him with a thought if he wanted. We will retreat, we will not seek revenge, the pudgy man promised. So long as you do not seek revenge on us, this mining estate will be yours to keep. He immediately turned to Yuna and offered his own blood to create a new contract, one that would transfer the contract over to the Reborn Company. Instead, Michael used the pudgy man's blood to break it entirely. He didn't need to force the mining estate to become their allies. Soon after, the pudgy man and his allies left, their automobiles racing off into the distance as fast as possible. And as they left, Michael began to realize how far they had come. Now their reputation was intimidating, even to that of the upper echelon companies. He was glad he'd be able to continue his progression of the electrical grid without much problem.
They.
Meanwhile, a day later, the pudgy man and his compatriots finally returned to their headquarters in the northern part of the Queen's region. At first, they were angry learning that they lost a vital piece of their resource, but once they found out that it was the Reborn Company, their blood immediately turned cold. They praised the pudgy man for not making things worse. But what are we to do? We need those minerals, one of the employees in the company said. Yes, we need it, but we can't do anything about it. You want us to wage war against the Reborn Company? Only fools start a fight knowing they'd lose. Their leader's words were sensible. They knew it too, but forced by desperation, they knew that they had to get more minerals in order to fulfill their quota. Leave the Reborn Company alone, their leader said. I'll talk with them. Hopefully, I've built enough of a relationship with them that they'll allow us to be late in our delivery. Then a couple of seconds later, a man entered their meeting room. "They're here, sir." Everyone in the room tensed. They began fixing their hair, their clothes, anything to make themselves look more presentable. The door opened once again and a small group of well-dressed men and women entered. Their quality of silk was brighter, their faces are more beautiful, their aura is more regal and elite than anyone else. "Mr. Earl Oscorp, welcome," said the leader of the Carifula Company. Early Oscorp sat down on a seat opposite the Carifula leader. "Have you readied what I need?" The leader began sweating. There's the thing, sir, we may need more time." This didn't put a smile on Earl's face. "That's not what you promised. You do know that those minerals will be important if I want to compete with my siblings for the Oscorp throne, right? If I don't win that succession, you won't benefit. We're all going to drown, so tell me, what's the problem? Why have you sullied my good morning?" Everyone in the room went silent, taut, they were filled with tension. The Carafuela leader had no choice but to tell the truth about how the Reborn Company took their territory. "Reborn Company, I've never heard of that," the man said. "They became popular while you were overseas, Mr. Oscorp," explained the leader. "Ah, but they're just a lower echelon company, right? Why would you let them get away with taking away what's yours? Just destroy them and get it back." The leader began sweating out of his hands. That's not a good idea, sir." Earl Oscorp abruptly stood up. "You're useless, all of you. Looks like I'll have to do this myself. Send me the location of that mining estate." Chapter 12:27, Golden Sun. Michael was given the report just a few hours later. The Shadow Orcs, in their good judgment, had embedded spies under the Carifula cultivators like a parasite burrowing under their innards. Because of that, Reborn was immediately alerted as soon as this new opponent aimed their sights at them. "Oscorp, a conglomerate, is targeting us." Now, Michael did know that they were growing at a tremendously fast pace. Inevitably, they were going to get the attention of the conglomerates one way or another. In fact, he was pretty sure that they were already considering them as a true opponent by now, much more so than the upper echelons. After all, they controlled the automobiles, they controlled the crude oil needed to fuel those cars. That second part was the most important one. The automobiles, not so much. According to the Shadow Orcs, they positioned somewhere along the elite territories. They'd been hearing about some experimental vehicles coming out of the conglomerates' estates. They were very crude, just bare bones and barely even working. But this meant that they were already starting to try and reproduce the automobile either for their own use or for commercial uses. He expected that, but even if that did happen, he knew that they would still come out on top. There wasn't anywhere in the royal continent where they could find crude oil except for the parched lands, the very territory they all considered so worthless that they gave it away to a child. So he was expecting the conglomerates to stop by their territory one of these days, probably a contract here, a negotiation there. But he didn't think that they would outwardly attack so easily. "Our opponent is called Earl Oscorp. He's one of the main heirs of the Oscorp conglomerate, 10th in line. He has full control over a subcompany of the Oscorp conglomerate that is focusing mainly on the mining and minerals aspect of their business." And there, the pieces started to fall into place. Earl Oscorp had considered the mining estate to be a good source of their products. Losing it was definitely a good hit on their business, and now they were planning on retaliating. "The Dragonborns are protecting the mining estate, am I right?" "They aren't equipped for this kind of fight," Cassell said, appearing from behind him. The Shadow Orcs bowed towards the Reborn CEO before letting her explain her reasoning. As it turned out, the Shadow Orcs had detected several more movements coming in from different territories. Rebornian territories. They had caravans, merchants, traders, everything. They had sent out a full armada of their businesses onto Angora City and the neighboring territories around them. What's interesting was that these caravans had absolutely no soldiers among them. They're smart, Michael realized. After all, those were territories that were especially crucial to the blood flow of Reborn. Angora City was the nexus of their trade. It was where the products coming from the nation of Reborn converge. It's where they were stored before they were distributed to the other territories. Earl Oscorp was planning to conquer those territories through business.
They, they, they,
Somewhere in the upper echelon territories, a man wearing dark clothes described Angora City in perfect detail. "That city is quite nice," Earl Oscorp said. "I shall live here once we conquer Reborn. Now tell our men to start their business siege." One of his advisors who sat at his left nervously rubbed his hands together. Sir, I don't have a good feeling about this. We have yet to spread our information network in the Lower Queens region. We lack the necessary data to make a move." "Tusk, is that even necessary when dealing with a lower echelon company?" Earl Oscorp snorted. However, that was the exact reason why his advisors were worried. Angora City looked too good. The roads were uncharacteristically wide and smooth, as if they were made from marble itself. The structures here were massive, using some kind of ability power to keep them lit up from the inside. The streets were orderly. The citizens wore expensive silk, every single one of them, as if it was normal. Then, those automobiles roaring with those guttural sounds, they were technology beyond understanding. In short, Angora City looked even better than a territory from the elites. Even conglomerate estates weren't as well developed. "I know what you're thinking," said Earl, "but you don't have to worry. They don't have a secret backer. They aren't being supported by a conglomerate of any kind. I've already checked." This was the reason why he was so confident in attacking. "Now let us start our business here," Earl said. "Unleash the nascent influence."
they, they, they,
The effect was instant. Michael felt something ping in his chest as his nascent core detected the anomaly. "They're attacking Angora City," he said. It was as if his nascent influence was a tranquil sea becoming as translucent as glass. But then, someone came in and trudged their feet through the calm waters, disturbing everything. Michael could see it clearly, even if he was so far away. "Ha, you'll have to try harder than that," he said. Suddenly, golden nanoparticles emerged out of his skin, slowly forming into a tight-fitting armor around his body. It continued on from his feet up to his chest and all the way over towards his head. His helm resembled that of a motorcycle helmet, with the visor as golden as the sun. This was his nascent armor, his true power. And immediately he teleported over to Angora City, above its walls, above the shining infrastructure, up in the clouds. His golden figure shined as the sun hit its rays behind him. Then he spread his nascent blanket, a defense against nascent influence. It was like he had become Angora City, its streets becoming his veins, the buildings his muscles. He felt every single footstep that his citizens walked around. And he also felt the anomaly. There, on the outskirts of the walls, a small group, enemies disguised as foreign merchants. His focus solidified. A hooded man amongst the caravans suddenly fell on his knees, shaking. Chapter 12:28 Warfare. The foreigners immediately huddled over towards their fallen comrade, wondering what had happened to him. Panic spread amongst them. After all, the man they were huddling over was the strongest person in their group. He was a nascent spirit cultivator, one of the few in Earl's employ. And this cultivator, shaking, was completely disheveled. His face was pallid, as if he'd just seen a ghost. But that wasn't entirely accurate. What he had not seen was an apparition. Instead, he'd seen a glimpse of the golden sun above Angora City. He saw Michael's fully adorned nascent spirit armor for a brief second as Michael tore through the man's nascent core. A nascent influence was powerful. However, it left the cultivator in a completely vulnerable state during casting it. He would have never expected such a quick response. In fact, he never expected a response at all. They didn't think that a lower echelon company would have a nascent spirit cultivator in their midst, and one that could teleport great distances in an instant. That was their greatest mistake. Reborn could be considered an upper echelon company, all but in name. Let's leave." The man was desperate. He could barely support his own body. And after seeing his state, the other foreigners who were getting ready to spread their products in Angora City were forced to repack their stuff and immediately take off back where they came from. The nascent influence was one that would have made the citizens of Angora City feel an intense cold despite the morning sun blazing its heat down. They freeze, and that was where the products of the Oscorp conglomerate would come in and give them relief. Usually, this kind of slight was enough for Michael to take them into custody, leave them into the hands of their resident devil in the depths of their nation. However, Michael wanted to send a message. Reborn was not to be messed with. And also, it would be better for them to return to their headquarters. Thanks to the vulnerability, the chaos, and the abruptness he left them feeling, the Shadow Orcs were able to infiltrate their forces and imbue a few shadows into their feet. The elite penumbras were dispatched, 4 of them. No doubt they'd be able to stay undetected throughout the whole ordeal, and even if they were found out, they had the proper means and tools to get out safely and without letting them know who they were.
They, they,
A few days later, a messenger was sent back into the upper echelon territory, where Earl Oscorp was currently staying. "What, how useless," he screamed, throwing the entire dining table upside down. His advisors all cowered under his wrath. "Sir, I think it's time we consider. Send more of our forces, tell my generals to become more aggressive." Now Earl was planning on going the path of anger. He was going to truly attack Reborn where they could be hurt. He was no idiot, he knew that perhaps. His initial understanding of Reborn had been wrong. Perhaps there was more bite to this little pup in the dredges of the continent. So he took the advice of his advisors and began his information network. It didn't take long before they got a general view of Reborn's situation. In a map, they properly identified all of Reborn's territories, allies, and important cities and towns. Of course, since their information network had just started, the data they gathered were purely on the surface level, and it was information that the Shadow Orcs were willing to give them. "Attack these territories," Earl commanded.
they,
A few days had passed, and Michael got the call from the Shadow Orcs. It seemed that the elite penumbras they sent were able to find evidence that they were starting to move again. As it turned out, their leader, Earl Oscorp, was still out in the upper echelon region. Meanwhile, most of his armies were somewhere in the lower Queens region. The Shadow Orcs were able to properly map their hideouts in their dynamic map. "BU-22, boss, we were able to infiltrate their forces here. We will be notified anytime that they are given instructions." Michael nodded. "Do we have any spies for Earl Oscorp himself?" "Tata, my apologies, boss. Our elite penumbras tried to infiltrate their base but found that they had a nascent spirit cultivator protecting them from such infiltration. We wouldn't be able to break through." This was as expected. After all, they were dealing with a conglomerate. They may only be a sub-branch, but their resources were still immense, probably even more than a typical upper echelon company. "Sir, they were just given a command. They're attacking our new allies." They pointed it out on the map, and just like they said, the forces of Oscorp were moving over towards the newly appointed allies of Reborn. This was hard because they had still yet to finalize the alliance. The shadows had yet to fully sink their shadows in them, meaning they weren't as fully protected as the territories of Reborn. "They're attacking so brazenly, they'll get ostracized if they do this," Michael said. It was at this point that Una shook her head and pointed towards the mountains and plains around their allies. "I know how these conglomerates work, they'll target these places instead." As he ruminated on her words, the dynamic map inside their room changed. Small red blobs coalesced into a bigger blob which were now attacking the empty mountains and spaces near their allies' territories. Michael's eyes widened. "They're attacking their resources." The attack was fast. They began spreading oil around crop fields, burning them with a simple fire ability power. The local defense force tried to fight against the invaders, but the invaders didn't fight back. They just tried to finish their job and disrupt the resources. Mountain mines were hit by unnatural earthquakes, burying mineshafts. Local factories were hit with arson. Inns and hostels were invaded by a plague of rats. They attacked the lifeblood of the territory. Chapter 12:29, Repentance. "They're planning on making the lives of our allies suffer," Michael realized. "Aren't they going to get in trouble because of this?" And according to Una, they could be. This is certainly a gray area. According to the rules of the world, nature is not owned by anyone. They are not a part of the territories owned by any company or organization. However, that doesn't mean that they could do whatever they want and get away with it. As long as we are able to prove that they are the ones that did this, my family will be able to prosecute them. This was good news, but not enough it seemed. However, that would take some time just to gather enough evidence to prosecute them, much more the process needed to get justice. By that point, it would be a month at the very least. Earl Oscorp knew that they'd get in trouble for attacking these territories, but he didn't care. All he wanted to do was weaken the Reborn Company by weakening his allies. And all it would cost was a fine from the Montgomerys. It would probably cost them hundreds of millions of sand dollars, but they could easily go away with that kind of money. They were conglomerates after all. Don't worry, Lord Michael, I have already dispatched my brother to repel them, Shayna said. And just like she said, Michael changed his perspective on a mini drone dispatched in their allied territories. On a mountain side, hooded figures emerged from a cave with blood dripping out of their dark uniforms. Looks of terror and fear were written all over their faces. A few seconds later, a young man with dark blue hair emerged out of the cave, his lightning-infused sword leaning on his shoulder. "Shadow Orcs, can you please round up our little guests here? I can't be bothered to chase after them," Jakku said. Shadows emerged from the cave, chasing after the saboteurs that dared to bury miners in the mineshaft through an explosion. A similar thing happened in the rice and paddy fields on the plains below the mountains. A tremendously huge fire billowed up into the skies. It burned crops at a tremendous rate, destroying months of livelihood in mere seconds. The only thing that these crops would feed would be the fire that continued to get bigger and bigger. The saboteurs watched their handiwork with satisfied looks on their faces. Seeing the huge plume of smoke in the skis and all over the place would help obscure them so that they could escape undetected. But just then they heard a small gust of wind. It was cool, breezy, a completely opposite of the hot and scaling air caused by the fire. They all turned their heads to see a hurricane gathering in the distance. White wind rotated at insane speeds, moving towards the fire within seconds. Fire and wind met. Now, conventional wisdom suggested that fire would come out on top of this meeting. The tornado would only feed the fire more oxygen, letting its fire billow out even more. But something strange happened. The hurricane started to swallow the fire, suffocating it. The fire that had spread on the weeds and crops below were being sucked out by the tornado, yet keeping them rooted to the ground. It wasn't long before the fire was completely put out. And once it had done its job, the tornado abruptly stopped in place and dissipated. It cleared the clouds with its disappearance, leaving the field sunny. The saboteurs were completely wide-eyed. Then they saw her, a woman with short green hair walking towards them with a tranquil expression on her face. It was then that they knew they had to escape. But when they tried, they found the air pushing them behind. It was sucking them towards the woman as if she was the center of the hurricane. Their screams were drowned by the sounds of farmers cheering at the woman, singing her praise. Thanks to the timely response of the Dragonborns and the Shadow Orcs, they were able to mitigate the damage done by the saboteurs. And with a little bit of magic from Michael himself, he was able to fix all the problems with relative ease.
They.
Over the next few days, the attacks kept coming. They were sending out all of their personnel to try and sabotage Reborn's allies, not knowing that they were sabotaging themselves. Each time they tried, they failed, and Reborn would gain more captives from Earl Oscorp's personal army. And at the end of the week, Early finally found out about the failed attacks and had a complete meltdown. Plates were destroyed, rooms were trashed. A lot of rumors about him going crazy had started to spread. "I want to know how they're doing this. Send people to go to their territories."
They.
That's what they were told, boss. Their leader now wants to go to Angora City so that they could find out our secrets, Naruto reported to him. Michael almost laughed at that. This was actually going to benefit them more. After all, he changed his perspective, now looking at a mini drone positioned in the Rebornian prison. There they contained all of the captured Oscorp saboteurs that they caught. And even now he could see their faces, their looks of surprise as they start to realize that this wasn't a prison, this was a paradise. When they were caught, they thought they'd be tortured by their captors, squeezed out of their information, and only then would they be killed. But none of that happened. Instead, they were just stuck here in the prison where they had everything they needed. It had food, good food, food that they'd only seen elites eat, yet the prisoners here were eating them and treating them as normal. They thought that this was just a trick, but a few days passed and this trick was still going on. It wasn't until they also found the other inmates that they found out that this was the truth. You mean to tell me that you all have your own rooms, can eat all you can, and have freedom to paint, exercise, or play games? Chapter 12:30, Persuading. The prison showed them a glimpse of what it was like to live as a Rebornian. It was a completely different world. It was as if everything they've ever known was false. Here, even prisoners were given comfortable pillows to sleep on. Here, they were starved because they looked the wrong way at an elite. Here, they were treated like humans, and not only that, but this prison had cold air circulating everywhere, keeping them cool during the day, and it also had heaters if the cold got too unbearable during the night. The prisoners had their freedom, they had entertainment, even. They were all cheering, watching, and expressing excitement as their baseball team scored, whatever that meant. Truly, it looked like this was a completely different world. Why did we ever think that following that prick was going to be the best thing we could do with our lives? They started to wonder. Earl Oscorp earned their loyalty, earned their souls, simply because he promised them riches. He promised them that if they just do whatever he wanted, then they could live the rest of their lives in peace. They could save their families from poverty. And in order to achieve that, they've done a lot of things, horrible things, things that they were still having nightmares about to this day. And they told themselves that this was okay. As long as they persisted, Earl Oscorp was going to give them riches that could save their families from a horrible death in the streets. They thought that this was the only way. Yet, why do the prisoners here in Reborn living so much better than them? Why were the prisoners here given everything they've ever needed in exchange for nothing? They're prisoners. They didn't deserve anything. Yet Reborn gave them everything. When they asked the Rebornian guards about why they were doing this, they answered that this was just the bare minimum. Their leader, Michael, ensured that everyone who lived in his nation would not worry about their lives again, even if they were prisoners, even if they've done irredeemable sins. This was a complete revelation to these people. Back home, they were doing unspeakable things for a tiny bit of life. They were selling their souls to Earl just so that they could live out a normal life. But as it turned out, the riches, the comfort, everything that Earl promised them were nothing but the bare minimum. In fact, it was even less than that. As it turned out, they didn't have to do any of that. They didn't have to destroy lives in order to live theirs. And because of that, they couldn't help but think that they'd wished they lived here instead. Even if they spent the rest of their lives here in the prison, they'd still be happy with that. It took about a month before their minds were made up. One of the Oscorp saboteurs asked an audience with Michael. He agreed. The Oscorp saboteur looked at Michael through the prison glass, seeing the man, the myth, the legend, right in front of him. This was the man who had made a prison a literal paradise. "Sir, I am from the Oscorp company. My leader is Earl Oscorp and he has plans that threatens to destroy your company." The man began to tell Michael everything about his position, his missions, and everything else he could recall from his time back in the Oscorp estate. He wants to win the succession, that's why he's desperate to find anything that could elevate his status. And right now, he found the Reborn company. He took a second of pause. I don't want that. I see what you've done here in the prison and I don't want that bastard to desecrate this place. Michael kept silent, letting the man talk and let out his emotions. "I know that I was your enemy and that you don't trust me, but please let me help you. I shall offer myself. I could infiltrate back into Earl Oscorp's estate and find myself in close proximity with him. Once I'm in kill shot, I will detonate myself with whatever bomb you wish to place on me." The Oscorp saboteur knew that this was the only way to ensure that Earl wouldn't be able to destroy this place. And even if he'd only spent a month here, he was already willing to offer his life for it. I only wish that you save my family from that estate. That man treats life like it's something like trash, and if he's angry, which I have no doubt he is now, he will continue to send more people to their deaths. It was an earnest proposal, one that was quite heroic if one thought about it. But Michael, of course, immediately disagreed. No, he said. But we do not need more casualties than we already have. Killing Earl will only exacerbate the problem. The Oscorp company will want revenge. The man immediately interjected. He's a black sheep within the family. His other siblings will probably thank you for disposing of him. Michael still shook his head. Even then, it's not worth it, but do not worry, I will make sure that he won't be able to spread any more deaths. There was still doubt in the man's eyes. He'd seen Earl act. He'd seen how cruel the man could be. Michael smiled. Do you think Earl is powerful? Yes, the man replied. Why? Because he has all the resources that he needs. He has people around him, strong people, that will do anything he wishes even if they tarnish their soul in the process. Michael looked at him. People like you. The man nodded. People like me. Then it's good, Michael said with a smile. If they're like you, then they can be persuaded. If they're like you, then they'll also wish to live a better life. I'll give them that, and by then, they won't ever need to depend on Earl ever again. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. This is Jason audiobook, and I just want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you for staying all the way through. Whether you're listening to relax, to escape, or to dive deeper into these incredible worlds, your time and support truly mean everything. Every like, every comment, and every share helps this channel grow and allows more stories to come to life in audiobook form. You're not just listeners, you're part of this journey. If you have a web novel you'd love to hear turned into an audiobook, don't hesitate to send me a DM. I'm always looking for new adventures to bring to the channel, and your suggestions could be the next big story we dive into. And if you're enjoying the content and want to support even more, consider checking out the Patreon for exclusive early releases, bonus chapters, and behind-the-scenes content. Once again, thank you for being here. Until the next chapter, stay immersed, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story.